Hello and welcome to this slightly different video here on Scott Grows an Avocado Tree. Now, as the name suggests, I am trying to grow an avocado tree from seed to the point of bearing fruit. But along the way, I want to share what I learn about plants, and today I'm going to be expanding that to what I've seen and what I've reflected upon about the environment, a bit broader than usual. Now, I love spending time in gardens, but I also love spending time in wilderness areas. And I was able to spend a lot of time recently doing that. If you follow me on Instagram, you may have noticed that I took a couple of week break from the social internet recently. During this time, my wife and I took a trip to New Zealand. During this time, I read several books, unplugged from the internet, and got to see some really amazing environments. And I had some reflections which I thought might be interesting to share here to you guys. So in this video, I'm going to take you on a little tour of Christchurch's Botanic Garden, which is absolutely beautiful. And I'm also going to show you around Doubtful Sound, which is one of the magnificent fjords of New Zealand. But before we go any further, I'd like to show you a short montage of some of the magnificent sights that I saw in New Zealand. Whenever we travel, my wife and I try to get to whatever gardens are in the area. So early on in our trip, we headed to the Christchurch Botanic Garden. As you know already, I love gardens. The collection of plants, planted and cared for over a long period of time, the careful planning and thought that goes into creating beautiful gardens, it's just beautiful. The garden here covers an area of 21 hectares or 52 acres with a river circling on which you can see gondolas punting. They have a huge variety of plant life here, many New Zealand natives, as well as many other plants from all around the world. They even have one of the rare and endangered Wallamai pines, which I was thrilled to get a look at through its protective cage. Christchurch has a cool climate. In winter, the days rarely reach 15 degrees Celsius, and they average 70 frost nights per year, so anything sensitive to cold cannot survive outdoors. But that doesn't stop these gardens. The garden has a number of conservatories, or indoor gardens in glass houses. In Cunningham House, which was opened in 1923, there are a huge range of subtropical plants and is an indoor plant enthusiast's dream. The size and condition of the plants was fantastic. The smell in there was amazing, and it would be very easy to spend the entire afternoon in there. Just look at the size of this fiddly fig. Look at this fiddly fig. This is a fiddly fig, it's huge. But the Cunningham House was built onto and extended with a number of different conservatories, all connected. There's the Townend House, which houses a huge range of flowering plants. I really loved Garrick House, which was named after a man who donated a huge collection of succulents and cacti to the garden in the 1950s. It was quite warm in the room, but the plants there were flourishing. This is the largest publicly owned collection of cacti and succulents in New Zealand. The mural on the back wall was painted by Gordon G., one of the former label writers of the garden, and depicts landscapes from Africa and South America where these plants originate from. Gippsland House was steamy, featuring tropical plants including a number of carnivorous ones. There are 2 rose gardens here, which were blooming as we visited. And there were lots of bees. I was surprised at the bees here. I'd never seen a bumblebee in person before. We don't have them on mainland Australia. They were introduced to New Zealand by Europeans many years ago, and I was surprised by their size and how cute and fluffy they are. The garden has a huge greenhouse complex next to their cafe, which we don't have access to, but it houses a huge number of plants. And a Titan arum was on display, though it had finished blooming and was decomposing when we saw it. It was still huge. The Titan arum is one of the largest flowers in the world. The care that has gone into these gardens is amazing. It is beautiful with many trees over 100 years old, with lakes and fountains and many paths with carefully planted and planned gardens all around. And all of this is free to access by the public. I really loved my visit to these beautiful gardens. This beautiful place cared for and cultivated for over 100 years, carefully planned and managed and loved. Towards the end of the trip, my wife and I had a cruise overnight on the ship the Navigator on Doubtful Sound. I'd never been to a fjord before, and it was phenomenal. It took a coach, a ferry and another coach before we reached Deep Cove and our ship, through which our drivers and nature guides talked about the history of the area. Doubtful Sound is a part of Fiordlands National Park, New Zealand's biggest national park, covering over 12,500 square kilometres. Fiordlands National Park is a part of the Te Wahipaunamu World Heritage Area. World Heritage Areas are areas identified as significant historically, culturally or naturally, and are protected and are to be conserved for the future, which is absolutely appropriate for this area. The plants here are all native to New Zealand and are ancient. These plants have remained genetically unchanged since the time of the dinosaurs. It's home to a huge variety of wildlife. We were fortunate enough to see a colony of New Zealand fur seals, a small pod of endangered bottlenose dolphins, and some little blue penguins. I even had a chance to go for a swim in the fjord, which was pretty special. The fjords are formed by glacial activity where, during the ice ages, huge amounts of ice literally carved deep and steep valleys into the mountains. The plant life is really interesting here. There is almost no soil on the rocky mountain around the fjord. Instead, moss and lichen grow, which allow trees to put out shallow roots into them, and the trees can weave their roots between the roots of other trees. Often, you'll find stripes of bare mountain. This is where a tree has begun falling and has taken trees that it was connected to down with it. This is called a tree avalanche, and it is different to a landslide because it's not actually the land sliding, though landslides do happen here too. Over time, the moss and lichen will regrow, and so will the trees. This is truly an amazing place and absolutely should be protected. It feels like a privilege to have been here to be able to visit. It's certainly something that I will remember. New Zealand has an amazing diversity in its landscapes. There is so much beauty here, both naturally occurring and man-made. And that got me thinking about perspectives. Our perspective towards the environment can explain the way we treat it and view it. It can explain our relationship with the environment,
There are 4 main environmental perspectives, and I pass no judgment on any of them, and I will claim that none are superior than the others, though of course I do have my biases. The first is stewardship. Stewardship is to look after something entrusted to you. The perspective of stewardship views the land as something which is a privilege for humans to be on, and it is our duty to preserve it in its untamed beauty. Stewardship perceives the environment as being valuable in its own sake, that it doesn't need to provide humans with anything, and it should be protected because it exists. There is a lot of evidence of this perspective in New Zealand. All the national parks, all the programs to protect the native animals from introduced predators, the education about the wilderness, all reflects a perspective of stewardship, that the environment is something that needs to be cared for and not controlled. The second perspective is imperialism. Imperialism views the land as something that is to be controlled by humans. Humans are the most dominant species, and it's therefore our right to control the land. This view was particularly prevalent in the 18th and 19th century and is quite a Western point of view. The imperialism perspective is visible in New Zealand too. The garden in Christchurch is a testament to imperialism. When the first European settlers came from Britain, they were eager to control the environment and shape it so that it was reminiscent of their home back in England. The city of Christchurch, in fact, has been called the most English city outside of England. The third perspective is Romanticism. Romanticism was a perspective that rose towards the end of the 18th century as artists and poets and writers were spending more time in wilderness environments. Romanticism was a reaction against imperialist views, but it isn't the same as stewardship as it doesn't believe in protecting the environment for its own sake. Romantics believe that the environment is valuable to humans as a thing of beauty and is sometimes given a status of being godlike. For Romantics, the environment is most beautiful when it is unaffected by humans. The fourth perspective is utilitarianism. The roots of utilitarianism believe that the most important things in life is feeling good. Things that cannot feel things, therefore, aren't valuable. This perspective poses that the environment is something to be utilised by humans, often as a resource. This perspective is also evident in New Zealand. Throughout history, huge portions of forest have been cleared. There were little gold rushes throughout the country, and lots of land has been cleared for farming. Now, I can see myself falling into all of these categories, and it's likely that you can see yourself falling into multiple categories as well. I certainly consider myself to have a stewardship perspective. I want to preserve the land because I think it's valuable in its own right. I also want to minimise the negative impact I have on the environment, both locally and globally. I also think that nature is most beautiful when it's left in its purest form, like a romantic. But then I can't deny that I don't have any imperialist perspective, for I really love visiting gardens and gardening myself. Nor can I deny a utilitarian perspective because I know that to live the lifestyle I do, resources need to be found. But something that I do want to do, above all, is to not damage the environment. To preserve the wilderness and natural environments, I want to make sure that what I do is sustainable and wise and helpful and good. That's the kind of gardener I want to be, and it's the kind of life that I want to live. And so I will listen to the advice of experts and consider carefully my decisions that affect the environment on a local, national and global scale. New Zealand truly is a magnificent, majestic and beautiful place, and I feel that my trip there was valuable to me, and I feel better for having it. I hope to visit again soon, and if you ever get the opportunity to visit New Zealand, I encourage you to do so, and take care to leave as little impact as possible.
Thank you very much for watching this video. I'd love to know what you thought in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time.